Kids, I'm gonna tell you an incredible story. The story of how I met your mother. Because that, kids, is the true story of how I met your Aunt Robin. Kids, every story in a man's life is like a dot in an impressionist painting. And when
that's a no?
Yeah, that's a no. Kids, when you're single, all you're looking for is happily ever after. But only one of your stories can end that way. So kids, would you like to hear the story of the time I went deaf? Kids, before I met your mother, when I was still out there searching, I learned something valuable. That love is not a science. So kids, there are many buildings in New York City. Kids, this is a Thanksgiving story. Thanksgiving in New York is a wonderful time. And that, kids, is the true story of how I met your mother.
What?
I'm kidding. Kids, the thing about New Year's Eve is that it sucks. Now kids, Moby was a popular recording artist when I was young. Kids, in life there are a lot of big romantic moments, and they make life worth living. Kids, something you might not know about your Uncle Marshall is that he's always been good at games. Kids, I tell you a lot of inappropriate stories, but there's no way in hell I'm telling you this one. Don't worry though, it wasn't that great.
That is the greatest story ever!
Kids, when it comes to love, the best relationships are the ones that just come naturally. And kids, that's exactly what we did with our last day. The museum, the bridge, the restaurant, and all of those nice things. Kids, your grandma always used to say to me, nothing good happens after 2 a.m. And there you have it, kids. The stupidest thing I've ever done. In one night, I managed to hurt 2 people I cared about. And none of it would have happened if I had just listened to my mom. Kids, about 8 months into Aunt Lily and Uncle Marshall's engagement, there occurred a game-changing emergency. Kids, life is a dark road. You never really know what's up ahead. One night you're cruising along, enjoying the ride, and then all of a sudden, you're 28. Kids, you know that photo in the den? It was taken back in 2006 when Grandma and Grandpa came to visit me, and we all went out to brunch. Kids, sometimes a relationship goes so smoothly for so long that you think it will be that way forever. It never is. Kids, when you reach your late 20s, you might be surprised to discover you still don't have life quite figured out. Kids, there's nothing more wonderful than New York City in the winter. Except the view of New York City in the winter through your apartment window. Now kids, when you're out at a noisy, crowded bar, you can always tell the difference between the singles and the couples. Kids, as you know, Christmas is a time you spend with your family. Kids, you remember my first date with Robin.
I think I'm in love with you.
What?
But kids, later that night, Katie did it. And she got pregnant. With quintuplets. And she lived out her days in a trailer park, where she died an alcoholic. Kids, I've told you stories about all the big holidays. Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving. But one holiday was always my favorite. Super Bowl Sunday. Kids, never underestimate the power of destiny. Because when you least expect it, the littlest thing can cause a ripple effect that changes your life. Kids, funny thing about destiny. I thought I was destined to get that job. But I was wrong. My destiny was to stay in New York. Because if I hadn't, I never would have met your mother. Kids, the key to a good relationship is communication. You need to talk.
Wait. No,
kids, this was the worst fight Robin and I ever had. It was one of those fights that lasts for hours and you start to get woozy and lose track of what you're fighting about. Kids, sometimes life forces us to be someone we didn't want to be. Kids, in the spring of 2007, everything was great between me and Robin. So we decided to try and make it even better. We decided to move in together. Now kids, the story of Aunt Lily and Uncle Marshall's wedding is a good one. No matter how perfectly you plan your... You know what, wait a second, guys. I'm gonna get to that. First, I gotta tell you what happened with Barney.
Rich!
You see, kids, when you get married, you learn a hard lesson. The wedding you set out to have is almost never the wedding you end up with. Kids, there's more than one story of how I met your mother. You know the short version, the thing with your mom's yellow umbrella. Kids, I can't remember exactly what helped me get through the whole Robin Gael incident. Kids, when you visit New York, there's countless fun things to see and do. And yet, Colleen and Lindsay took us to Tater Skins. Kids, I know you think that you've heard every story from back before I met your mother. But there are some stories you tell, and some stories you don't. Kids, back in the fall of 2007, I was dating this girl named... Oh God, what was her name? It's been 23 years, I can't remember all this stuff. For the sake of the story, let's call her.
Everyone, this is Blah Blah.
Kids, to understand this story, you need to know that your Uncle Marshall was doing something that lots of college kids do. How do I say this? He was, let's say eating a sandwich. Now kids, when I'm facing a tough decision, I like to get out the old yellow legal pad and make a list of pros and cons. Marshall knew all the cons. Kids, your Uncle Marshall likes to say that he made 3 big mistakes in his life. Kids, the early bloom of a romance is a wonderful thing. You see, kids, during the summer, Marshall had taken the New York bar exam. Kids, this girl I was dating would not stop talking. Can you imagine how awful that is? Kids, you remember the slap bet. A year earlier, Marshall made a bet with Barney and won the right to slap him 5 times. Okay, kids, the truth is, Bob probably looked like this.
Hey, sweetie.
You see, kids, friendship is an involuntary reflex. It just happens. You can't help it. Kids, back in 2007, it seemed like everyone belonged to these silly things called gyms. Kids, too often in life, we make decisions that we're not prepared to live with. This is a story about those decisions and the consequences that follow. Kids, I never would have met your mother without a little luck. Specifically, the luck of the Irish. Kids, it's sometimes possible to think you're doing just fine in life.
Next message.
Can you put it on my tab?
Kids, sometimes in life you see someone and you just instantly know. This is the person for you. It can happen anywhere. And that, kids, is how you turn a no into a yes. Kids, back when we were younger, your Uncle Marshall and I were really into college basketball. Kids, the spring of 2008 was a pretty great time for me. Stella and I had started dating, and I'd just gotten a big raise at work, so I decided to purchase something I knew would be the envy of all my friends.
A new car.
Kids, when Aunt Robin was a teenager, she was, well, a Canadian pop star. But by 2008, she was an entirely different person. Well, kids, here we are. We've arrived. My 30th birthday. The long-awaited story of the GOAT. Now, kids, the spring of 2008 was a complicated time in your old man's life. The last time I had seen Barney was shortly after I found out he had spent the night with Robin. Kids, in the spring of 2008, something kind of strange had been happening to your Uncle Barney. He'd be doing great with a woman. Kids, sometimes you can do something right 1,000 times in a row. Kids, sometimes you can do something right 1,000 times in a row. Kids, a lot of weird random things have happened in my life. But that car accident is one of the few that I call a miracle. Kids, here's something I wish my dad had told me. The longest pause you will ever experience in your life is the one that follows asking the question. Kids, when I first moved to New York, it was dingy, disgusting, dirty, ugly, flea-ridden, stinky, and altogether terrifying. Kids, in the fall of 2008, I had a little problem.
All right, I gotta get to Stella.
Kids, your Aunt Robin was sick of her job at Metro News 1. Now, you kids can either believe this or not, but this is how your Aunt Robin swears it happened. Kids, to understand the story of the scorch mark, I first need to tell you the story of the intervention for our friend Stuart. Kids, when you're in a relationship, you develop a kind of telepathy with your partner. Kids, morals usually come at the end of stories, but this one is so important, I'm going to tell you now. Don't ever, ever invite an ex to your wedding. And kids, if I had just let Stella talk to Robin, this whole story might have ended differently. Kids, sometimes you think you're living out one story, but the truth turns out to be something else entirely. So kids, never invite an ex to your wedding. Kids, the day you get married is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, the perfect ending to a perfect love story. My wedding, at least my first wedding, didn't go so well. Kids, you may think your only choices are to swallow your anger or throw it in someone's face. There's a third option. You can just let it go. Kids, in the fall of 2008, your Aunt Robin was unemployed and a little bit adrift. So she valued her friendship with Lily more than ever. You see, kids, when I became an architect, I had one dream: to contribute a building to the skyline of New York City. Kids, everyone has an opinion on how long it takes to recover from a breakup. Now, kids, if you want to go swimming, you don't just dive in. First, you dip your toe in the water. Kids, I walked in on a lot of crazy stuff at the old apartment over the years. Kids, I've only been in one fight in my life, and this is the story of how it happened. Now, as you know, I'd recently been left at the altar. And the worst thing about getting left at the altar, I mean aside from actually getting left at the altar, was what came next. Kids, I'd love to leave you with the message that fighting is bad and you shouldn't do it. But I know that's pointless. So I'll leave you with this. Don't ever get in a fight with Uncle Marshall. That guy's freaking crazy. Kids, for what happened next, I'm gonna jump ahead a couple days. Kids, in the winter of 2009, Aunt Robin and I had just become roommates. And to be honest, it wasn't going very smooth. Kids, in our sophomore year of college, when Aunt Lily came back from spring break, Uncle Marshall surprised her at the airport. Kids, the blizzard of '09 was a monster. It snowed for 3 days straight, which led to 3 amazing stories. Kids, sometimes in life, the planets align, everything links up, and your timing is perfect. Kids, by the winter of 2009, Robin had been unemployed for months. But there was a glimmer of hope. Kids, I think I've told you about Karen. She was my girlfriend in high school and intermittently during college. She was beautiful, smart. I was madly in love with her. So you see, kids, sometimes when you have to have a tough conversation, the best thing to do. Kids, after getting laid off, I was finally pursuing my lifelong dream, starting my own architecture firm. I had to deal with her. And damn it if it wasn't the best year of my life. Because if any one of those things hadn't happened, I never would have ended up in what turned out to be the best job I ever had. I wouldn't have met your mother. Because as you know, she was in that class. Kids, on my first day as a college professor, there were two things I didn't know that I wish I did. First thing was that your mother was in that classroom. The second thing? Well, to explain that, we have to go back to the beginning of the summer. Kids, your Uncle Barney had been called a lot of names over the years, but there's one name none of us ever expected to hear him called. Kids, as you know, Aunt Robin grew up in Canada. That meant sometimes she dressed a little differently, sometimes she talked a little differently, she hung out at different bars, and enjoyed leisure time a little differently. Kids, as long as I'd known your Uncle Barney, he'd always had some pretty strong opinions on relationship. Kids, the secret to dating is very simple. Be confident, be comfortable in your skin, be assured of who you are. Uncle Barney was really good at that last one, even though a lot of the time who he was someone else. Kids, back in 2009, your Aunt Robin was the host of a morning show for local New York cable. And it was on pretty early. How early? Barney's last cigarette was in March 2017. Lily's last cigarette was the day she started trying to get pregnant. And Marshall's last cigarette was the day his son was born. And my last cigarette? 2 weeks into dating your mother. And I never looked back. Kids, you never know when you're about to meet someone really important. It's not like life gives you a warning. You just look up, and there they are. Kids, as you probably guessed, that wasn't the night I met your mother. Although I think I glimpsed her foot. But I did get a little bit closer to meeting the woman of my dreams. And your mom? Well, she got her yellow umbrella back. Kids, when you're in your 30s and live in New York, there's a few places you just never want to be. Times Square on New Year's Eve, Rockefeller Center around Christmas time.
Yeah.
But kids, we all have different ways of dealing with nerves.
It'll just be a few more minutes, Mr. Stinson.
Some people chew their nails. Some people tap their feet. And some people imagine they're being interviewed by renowned sportscaster Jim Nantz.
Yeah, I'm totally gonna sit my kids down one day and tell them about the time Uncle Barney nailed 7 chicks in a row.
Am I a bad dad? Kids, in many of my stories, I'm a starry-eyed romantic on a noble search for true love. In this one, I'm just a jerk. Kids, your Aunt Lily has always been one of those people who loves their birthday. Loves it. Kids, on a warm March evening in 2010, a New York City police boat pulled a 34-year-old white male out of the Hudson River. Your Uncle Barney. Your Uncle Barney finally gave Aunt Robin the super date she truly deserved. With a guy she truly deserved. Kids, you may be wondering how many of these stories I'm telling you are true. It's a fair question. After all, there's a fine line between a good story and a bald-faced lie. I've never met anyone who could work that line better than your Uncle Barney. Heck, he could jump rope with it.
Is this really happening?
Sure is, Ted.
True story. Kids, everyone has one or two moments when they make a huge, crazy decision that changes their lives forever. This is the story of mine. It all started with a visit from my mom and her longtime boyfriend, Clint, who was always saying stuff like,
Ted.
and kids, Marshall was right. I didn't give up on my dream house. Because that's the thing about stupid decisions. We all make them. But time is funny. And sometimes a little magical. It can take a stupid decision and turn it into something else entirely. Because kids, as you know, that house is this house. Kids, your Aunt Robin had only been dating Don a short while. When one evening, out of nowhere, kids, I'd love to tell you that over the years we didn't all drift apart a little at one time or another. You don't mean for it to happen, but it does. But no matter what, to this day, come hell or high water, we still all get together every year for robots versus wrestlers. Up to this point in the story, we had found doppelgangers, eerie but awesome lookalikes for 4 of the 5 members of our little group. Kids, when you're in your 20s, dating is great. But by the time you reach your 30s, you find out pretty fast everyone has baggage. Sure, you can stick to the small talk and pretend it's not there. You see, everyone's got some baggage. It's part of life. But like anything else, it's easier when someone gives you a hand with it. But ultimately, we only see what we want to see when we're ready to see it. So no, that girl wasn't your mother. She ended up being someone else's mother. In fact, they both did. Kids, your Uncle Barney grew up without a dad, and it always made him feel incomplete. But as he hugged Loretta, surrounded by the boxed-up remnants of his happy childhood, he realized he had one hell of a mom. Kids, in my early days of being a professor, I had one simple goal: give a lecture that changes someone's life. Then one afternoon in 2010, I achieved that goal. Kids, that day I had a horrible realization. If you can't spot the crazy person on the bus, it's you. Oh, we were big fans of New York's annual Halloween parade. I don't mean the one that takes place Halloween night in the Village. I mean the one that takes place the morning of November 1st, the annual post-Halloween Walk of Shame parade. Kids, the next morning, my class had the highest attendance ever. And not long after that, Randy used his severance money to start a little brewery. Now you can have a Warmpus at every bar in America. Kids, in the fall of 2010, I was designing the new headquarters for Goliath National Bank, which meant working side by side with your Uncle Barney. Kids, in the fall of 2010, our friends Stuart and Claudia had a baby, and Lily and Marshall were the first to visit the happy new parents. Kids, one morning in 2010, I opened the newspaper only to discover an op-ed written by Zoe Pearson. You remember Zoe. In those 4 column inches, she railed against me and my company, GNB, for wanting to tear down a beautiful old building called the Arcadian. And as if that wasn't bad enough, the piece ran on a Saturday, which, as you both know, is Dad's crossword day. And so Marshall stayed right on at Goliath National Bank. Of course, it wouldn't last forever. But that's another story. Kids, in the fall of 2010, it seemed like Aunt Lily could only talk about one thing: babies. Kids, in the fall of 2010, I was hosting my very first Thanksgiving, and I wanted it to be unforgettable. Kids, in the winter of 2010, we had a new addition to our little group, Zoe. Zoe was married to the captain. December of 2010, my friends and I decided to go see It's a Wonderful Life on the big screen. It seemed like something we all needed. After all, it had been a crazy couple days. It all started with a pregnancy test. Kids, when Lily and Marshall started trying to have a baby, they went a little crazy. Kids, when your best friend loses someone,
My dad said?
you drop everything and rush to his side, only to find yourself standing there with no idea what to do or say. Kids, after Uncle Marshall lost his father, he stayed home a while to take care of his mother. And the longer he stayed there, the more it was like he had never left Minnesota. My first kiss with Zoe was amazing and complicated. And that's how, for the first time in his life, Barney Stinson wound up on a date on Valentine's Day. Kids, sometimes wonderful things come out of horrible situations. Like, remember that trip I took to Hong Kong where I got stuck in the airport? Well, a funny thing happened that day. Kids, I bought the house we live in now way back before I ever met your mother. It needed a lot of work, but I had a vision for it. Kids, as you know, I was designing Goliath National Bank's new headquarters on the site of this old hotel, the Arcadian. Problem was, some people didn't want the Arcadian torn down. Even bigger problem, they were led by my girlfriend, Zoe. Kids, some couples always support each other, and some couples always challenge each other. But is one really better than the other? Yes, support is better, way better, but I'd have to learn that the hard way. Kids, when your Uncle Marshall finally quit Goliath National Bank to do something better with his life, he left on great terms with his boss. Kids, in 1983, Barney watched his father walk out of his life. And in 2011, when their first reunion ended badly,
I'd love nothing more than to be a part of your life.
this time it was Barney who did the walking.
Fine.
And that was almost the end of it, except a few weeks later. Kids, this is a story of landmarks. There are certain moments in life when you have to decide which things you can stand to see torn down and which things you have to preserve, no matter what. Such a moment came for us all in May of 2011 at a special meeting of the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. Kids, in the spring of 2011, Zoe and I broke up. But the good news, Goliath National Bank was finally ready to demolish the Arcadian and build the new headquarters I had designed for them. The only problem was I kept butting heads with my project supervisor on one very important issue. Kids, if there's one big theme to this story, and I swear we're totally, almost, not really all that close to the end, it's timing. Timing is everything. For example, I never would have met your mother if it weren't for a wedding. Kids, you can't talk. And sure enough, she was right. It didn't work. We just didn't realize it yet. Kids, in October 2011, your Aunt Robin was in therapy. And against all logic, it was actually going well.
We're gonna save the planet.
And kids, as we now know, they did. By the fall of 2011, technology had taken a lot of the intrigue out of life. The internet had everyone's wall of information. Nothing was a mystery anymore. Kids, in the fall of 2011, all of my friends were in relationships. So when Barney's brother James came to visit, it created a slight logistical problem. Kids, for years, your Uncle Barney had reveled in mocking Aunt Robin's Canadian heritage. But all that was about to change. Kids, after spending a decade dreaming of the wrong girl, I wanted more than ever for the next woman I met to be the real thing. Kids, you haven't truly lived until somewhere somebody puts a sign up because of something you did. For instance, kids, Einstein was right. Time moves at different speeds. To Barney, the previous night raced by in a blur. But then, all of a sudden, time stopped. Sometimes hours can feel like minutes, and sometimes a single second can last a lifetime. For Barney, the second that would never end was this one. In the fall of 2011, Lily and Marshall received a surprising gift from Lily's grandparents, their house in Long Island. Lily and Marshall decided to sell it for one simple reason. Kids, on New Year's Day 2012, Uncle Marshall took a trip to Minnesota to see someone he truly missed. January 1st, 2012, East Meadow, New York. A woman answers her door to find something more enigmatic and mysterious than Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. Would the five of us always live within a few minutes of that booth? No. That's life, kids. But here's what I discovered. Our booth was wherever the five of us were together. For Valentine's weekend, Lily and Marshall invited Kevin and Robin on a couple's getaway to Vermont. Kids, sometimes you realize the journey you've been taking has reached its final stop. So the question becomes, where do you go next? Kids, I'll never forget the first time I told your mother I loved her. It was a rainy day in New York. We just had a horrible lunch. The movie we wanted to see was sold out, and I just looked at her and said, I love you. It was a big deal for me. I hadn't said that to a girl since... Here's the funny thing. In my own crazy way, I was kind of happy. For the first time in years, there was no little part of me clinging to the dream of being with Robin, which meant for the first time in years, the world was wide open. Because kids, when a door closes, well, you know the rest. Kids, 2012 started out kind of crazy. Barney met a girl named Quinn. Kevin unproposed to Robin. I told Robin,
I love you, Robin.
Kids, in the spring of 2012, your Uncle Barney went off the grid for a couple weeks. So I was relieved when I got a text asking me to come over to his place. Kids, that was the one time I ever lost faith in the idea that my life would be better in 3 years. And what's funny is, 3 years from that moment, my life was amazing. Kids, every now and then, New York has a moment when every eye in the city is watching the same thing. This was one of those moments. We all watched breathlessly as the pilot on the ground told her what to do. And against all odds, your Aunt Robin landed that helicopter. In May of 2012, Marshall and Lily hosted a baby shower in the apartment. All their friends were there. So of course I made sure to show up exactly 3 hours late. Kids, when Aunt Lily went into labor, Marshall was somewhere slightly inconvenient. In Atlantic City, with Uncle Barney, and drunk to the point of talking like Yoda. Kids, this is the story of a wedding day that went horribly wrong.
Ted, the bride wants to see you.
Uncle Barney was getting married. How the hell did we get there? And he was right. Unfortunately, the when of it was still a little ways down the road. But the where of it? Kids, October of 2012 kicked off the autumn of breakups. And Barney, having broken his engagement with Quinn, was slowly trying to pick himself back up. Kids, it's no secret your Uncle Barney is a bit of a dog. And even though he loved me, I think he always wanted a wingman who was a bit of a dog too. Of course, Robin did find out. But we'll get to that. Kids, once your Uncle Marshall and Aunt Lily found a nanny for baby Marvin, they were excited for their first day out together in 5 months. And so were we. In the fall of 2012, Nick and Robin were going strong. Sometimes it's hard to say what it is exactly that makes a couple click. And so began the trial that would change the course of Marshall's career. But we'll get to that. Kids, this is a story about the time your Uncle Marshall went before the New York State Judiciary Committee, a panel that would decide the fate of his career. He thought he'd open with an icebreaker. Kids, you may be wondering why 5 adults in their 30s would take a jinx so seriously. It all started one day 5 years ago. So when someone finally jinxed Barney for the first time in years, we were pretty psyched. In the winter of 2012, the skyscraper that I designed was about to open, which got me thinking about the most influential architecture professor I ever had. With Christmas just around the corner, your Uncle Barney gave me the horrible gift of an unwanted secret. Kids, sometimes when you're about to give up on your love life forever for the 17th time, destiny intervenes. Instead of rushing in, I took my time to think up the perfect opening line. Before a man meets the woman he'll marry, he'll make one final horrible mistake. For me, that was Jeanette. Kids, early in this story, you may recall me saying something along the lines of,
Okay, no more dating. I am ready to settle down.
and at the time, I probably thought I meant it. But kids, I'll be honest. Being single's fun. Oh yeah, I had such a great time that it took someone very special to make me want to settle down. And that someone was Jeanette. Jeanette was the last girl I dated before I met your mother. The girl who finally got me to say. In the spring of 2013, Barney and Robin were just weeks away from tying the knot, but there were still some pretty big issues they hadn't agreed on. Kids, in April of 2013, your mother and I were very close, and yet very far apart. I was living on West 82nd Street. She was up on West 115th. She was getting a degree in economics. Kids, it's been almost 20 years since that cold April night in 2013. And I can safely tell you, if I could go back in time and relive that night, there's no way in hell I'd go to Robots versus Wrestlers. No, I'd go home. But none of those things is the thing I do first. You know the thing I do first. Kids, by the spring of 2013, Lily and Marshall had life figured out. Lily was making a name as the art consultant for The Captain. Marshall was a superstar environmental lawyer, and home life was a well-oiled machine. And then, something changed. Kids, this is the story of the night Barney's life completely fell apart. In 1994, Robin's dad took her to New York City for the first time. Kids, you can't cling to the past. Because no matter how tightly you hold on, it's already gone. Kids, in the spring of 2013, we were all tying up loose ends before the big wedding. I was right here in this very room, putting the finishing touches on the house. Barney and Robin were wrapping up rehearsal for their first dance. And Lily and Marshall were packing for their year in Italy. Kids, Barney and Robin's wedding turned out to be a life-changing weekend for all of us. Well, not just us.
One ticket to Farhampton, please.
But that afternoon at the Farhampton Inn, Aunt Lily and I tried to check in. Kids, it was 2 days before Barney and Robin's wedding, and everything was going off without a hitch. Kids, as you know, Lily and Marshall had decided to move to Rome after Barney and Robin's wedding.
We're going to Italy.
See!
But without telling Lily, Marshall had then accepted a judgeship in New York.
Good luck with that, Your Honor.
Until his always helpful road trip companion Daphne had selflessly come to his aid. All that night, I did nothing but choose poorly. But thanks to Cassie, I didn't get together with anyone at that wedding. And if I had, well then, your mother and I might never have met. Kids, Barney's mom had this blouse that she absolutely loved, but then Robin won it in a poker game, which led to some slight awkwardness. And kids, as I stood on that lighthouse and looked at that girl, I felt something happen inside me. Something that had only happened one other time in my entire adult life. And that, kids, is the kind of stupid thing you say before you've met the person who hits the reset button on the world, who makes everything new again, who makes it seem ridiculous that you ever considered settling. Because not 2 years later, 2 days before Barney and Robin's wedding, their reverend passed away, and the search was on for a replacement. Kids, when your Uncle Marshall's bus broke down 5 miles away from the Farhampton Inn, he made a vow.
I can walk that far.
And kids, that's the first drink your mother ever bought me.
Yeah, okay.
2 a.m. It's a good rule. But every rule has an exception. And for us, that exception was you, Luke.
We're having a baby!
Kids, the night your Aunt Lily and Uncle Marshall got engaged, the night I met Aunt Robin, was the night of your mom's 21st birthday. Your mom started dating Louis. And for a little while there, it was fine. It just wasn't love. But then, fate intervened. Kids, I must have heard your mom's rendition of La Vie en Rose a million times over the years. Every night when she tucked you in, for instance. But that performance, that first night I ever heard her sing, that one will always be my favorite. Decades later, Boy's new best friend finds out about the whole thing and never lets him live it down.
I hate you so much.
The whole thing taught me a lesson. If you love something, you can never let it go, not even for a second, or it's gone forever. Kids, the story behind that vow took place the morning of Barney and Robin's wedding. You see, after drinking way too much the night before, this is all your Uncle Barney remembers from the first 2 hours of his wedding day. And that's how it goes, kids. The friends, neighbors, drinking buddies, and partners in crime you love so much when you're young. As the years go by, you just lose touch. You will be shocked, kids, when you discover how easy it is in life to part ways with people forever. That's why, when you find someone you want to keep around, you do something about it. Kids, I won't lie, that was a long weekend. More ups and downs than I can count. It was a twisting, turning road that led to the end of the aisle. And not everything along the way was perfect. To be honest, not everything to follow would be perfect either. But what is? Here's the secret, kids. None of us can vow to be perfect. In the end, all we can do is promise to love each other with everything we've got, because love's the best thing we do. And on that lovely spring evening, that's exactly what Barney and Robin vowed to each other. And it was legendary.